The church teaches that the Lord's standard of marriage is between one man and one woman, but in the early days of the church, through revelation, the Lord commanded Joseph Smith to institute the practice of plural marriage, and the church practiced this for over 50 years. We do see a little bit of a precedent of plural marriage in the Old Testament, but why was it commanded at this time? Many people say that it was to increase the amount of children born into the gospel covenant, but we actually don't know the exact reasoning of why polygamy was commanded.
We find the answer to this question within the Book of Mormon itself, as well as in the specific revelation for polygamy, which is modern-day Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. In Jacob chapter 2 it says, "For there shall not any man among you have save it be one wife, and concubines he shall have none. For if I will, saith the Lord of hosts, raise up seed unto me, I will command my people." So according to the Book of Mormon, the only reason God would command polygamy is to raise up seed unto him. And in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, verse 63, it says that the law of polygamy was given to multiply and replenish the earth, so that the wives in polygamous unions can bear the souls of men.
It did result in a lot more children being born.
So polygamy did not actually increase the number of children born into a community. What it did is that it increased the number of children born to one man. Brigham Young specifically taught that the more wives and the more children you had, the greater your exaltation would be.
As well as giving more women who wanted to be married the opportunity to do so.
I just have to say that in many cases, polygamy obligated, and I'll say even forced women to marry, who did not want to be married polygamously or monogamously at all. Women like Fanny Young and Anna Liza Webb didn't want to be married monogamously at all. And Zina Huntington and Helen Mar Kimball and many others didn't want to be married polygamously.
And the per capita inequality of wealth was diminished as women who were not in good financial situations married into more financially stable households.
Wait, what? Even the wives of Brigham Young, who was probably the wealthiest man in Utah, did not experience a greater equality of wealth. In fact, from everything I've read, women became more destitute when they entered into polygamy. Of course, that wasn't always the case. Brigham's favorite wife moved into a mansion, while Heber's not-so-favorite wife, Presendia, had to move over 20 times. Some women even had to ask the church for financial help for the rest of their lives. Mary Elizabeth Leitner had to ask the next 3 prophets for financial help because they kept forgetting she existed. The women often had to earn money for themselves, by sewing, baking, opening their homes to boarders, or relying on other family members for financial help.
Latter-day Saints were not required to participate in plural marriage, but they were expected to accept this as revelation from the Lord.
So Brigham Young taught that the only men who become gods, or the sons of God, are those who entered into polygamy. In fact, Brigham Young openly criticized men who had less than 3 or 4 wives. Joseph F. Smith later said that this doctrine of eternal union of husband and wife, and in plural marriage, is one of the most important doctrines ever revealed to man, in any age of the world. Without it, man would come to a full stop. Without it, we could never be exalted. Polygamy was a requirement for exaltation, just like baptism is today.
So women could choose if they wanted to enter into a polygamous or monogamous relationship, or if they wanted to get married at all. It was up to them.
Again, it wasn't really up to the women. In the cases of Zina Huntington, Helen Mar Kimball, Fanny Young, Flora Ann Woodworth, and others, they didn't want to be married polygamously. But because of the power that the religious leaders had over them, they didn't really have a choice.
Some men, though, were specifically asked to participate in plural marriage, so this obviously brought a lot of really big challenges and hardships for Latter-day Saints.
From my understanding, this selective polygamy was more of a Joseph Smith thing. Once the Saints left the country and settled in Utah, they openly lived and believed that polygamy was the way to salvation and exaltation.
At its peak in 1857, it's thought that about half of Utah Latter-day Saints participated in plural marriage in some capacity, either as a spouse or they were born into it. In 1962, the United States made polygamy illegal, but Latter-day Saints engaged in civil disobedience by continuing to practice plural marriage and attempting to avoid being arrested. Some of them were caught and had to pay fines and serve time in jail. Then, in 1890, the president of the church, Wilford Woodruff, decided to make a manifesto where he said that plural marriage was now forbidden so that they could follow the laws of the United States. However, some Latter-day Saints continued performing plural marriages in Canada and Mexico and still stayed in their polygamous relationships. But in 1904, the president of the church, Joseph F. Smith, gave the second manifesto that said, anyone who's doing plural marriage is excommunicated. It's over.
Thank you for being as honest as you're being. Obviously, there are a few things that I'd like to add. While the first manifesto was given in 1890, historians like D. Michael Quinn have documented that some church apostles covertly sanctioned plural marriage after the manifesto. They were especially prevalent in Mexico and Canada, as you mentioned. However, a significant minority were performed in Utah and other states. This could have been anywhere to thousands, or perhaps more realistically, around 250 or so plural unions. Even the church admits that plural marriages were performed in Utah well into the 1900s, and that they don't know how many took place. And as you mentioned, the church did have to release a second manifesto in 1904, but they also had to release a third manifesto in 1933, until the practice eventually died away. I encourage every member of the church, if you're going to dive deeply into any part of church history, please dive into the history of polygamy. I would recommend books like Nauvoo Polygamy, In Sacred Loneliness, as well as the Documents edition, and Mormon Enigma, Emma Hale Smith. As Lindsay Hansen Park likes to say, the history of polygamy is the history of Mormonism.